Welcome to our session, Structured Literacy versus Balanced Literacy. What's the difference? We will be beginning in about 5 minutes. We'll be starting in 2 more minutes. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon session, Structured Literacy versus Balanced Literacy. What's the difference? My name is Des Arnold. I am a literacy staff developer through Educational Services at LIU. I see some faces that I saw through some of this morning's sessions and some names. Welcome back. I am one of our literacy specialists. I am also one of the 2 LETRS trainers that are staffed at LIU right now. We'll zoom through these webinar norms. I'm sure that you guys have all seen them quite a few times today. We'd like to see you engaged. We know that this is different for everybody. We honor all perspectives. Please feel free to ask any questions. And I assume good intentions, and I hope that you do as well. Your microphones are disabled. If you have something that you need to say, please raise your hand in your participants toolbar, or just unmute yourself. We did have some mic difficulties earlier with one of our participants. Hopefully it didn't continue. If you are able to and don't mind, please consider showing your video. If you just need to put something in the chat, feel free. There is a tab where you can chat and everybody can see, or you can send a message privately to me. And we will have a Q&A at the end of our session. You will be awarded Act 48 credit upon completion of the evaluation at the end of today. It is due by July 31st. Let's dive into today's content. We are going to define structured literacy and balanced literacy. We are going to compare and contrast the two. We're going to examine some reading and brain research and how it's applicable to structured literacy and balanced literacy. So let's start with balanced literacy. Here's as defined by Fontes and Pinnell in 1996. I'm sure you guys don't need me to read it to you. Although phonics, decoding, and spelling may be taught in the word study lessons, and are rarely taught systematically in a balanced literacy program. Rather, students are encouraged. I just got a pop-up that says my internet is unstable, guys. I'm really sorry. If you need me to repeat something, please put it in the chat. Balanced literacy instruction is focused on shared reading, where the teacher would read aloud to students and ask questions about the text. Guided reading, where students read texts at their current ability level and discuss them with the teachers in homogeneous groups. And independent reading, where the students would self-select books to read on their own. Sometimes balanced literacy is referred to as whole language with phonics. So let's take a look at what structured literacy is. Simply put, structured literacy is explicit, systematic teaching that focuses on phonological awareness, word recognition, phonics, and decoding, spelling, and syntax at the sentence and paragraph levels. It's a term that was coined by the International Dyslexia Association. In this definition, you can see a mention to knowledge and practice standards. The International Dyslexia Association defines the knowledge and practice standards as the knowledge and skills that all teachers of reading should possess to teach all students to read proficiently. Structured literacy approaches are effective at helping students with learning disabilities in the area of reading, such as dyslexia, in helping them learn to both read and write. So we're really looking at 2 approaches. Balanced literacy. Balanced literacy focuses on print combined with imagery and contexts. So we're talking a bit here about like the 3 cueing system. So we want to ask students what they think the sentence means based on the picture. Are there any clue words? We also have guided reading. This is not the act of guided reading groups, but the guided reading leveled texts, which are leveled and predictable. There's an embedded word study that focuses on phonics decoding and spelling. And their phonics in balanced literacy is frequently whole to part. So we're talking about small chunks and word families. It's often used as a phonics patch. But in a balanced literacy program, your phonics is going to look more like, here's a whole word, what parts do you know? Let's look at some things that you would see in structured literacy. Structured literacy teaches speech to print. There's explicit phonological awareness and phonics, decoding and encoding. When we talk about speech to print, we're talking about the understanding that our oral language occurs before we learn to read. That learning to read is not something that occurs naturally. So we have to work on that phonological awareness, the phonological processing in order to be able to read. The books that you would find in a structured literacy program are beginners, controlled texts, decodable texts, connected texts. And the phonological awareness and phonics portion is part to whole, starting with sounds, blending, and segmenting, starting with the smallest unit of sound and building onto that. Questions so far? The components of a balanced literacy program and a structured literacy program are a little different. We're going to look at them. And in the notes of the slide deck, there are links for where I pulled this information from. So in balanced literacy, we have a read aloud where the teacher reads to the students and then asks questions. Guided reading groups where students are grouped according to their reading level and then read guided reading leveled texts. Shared reading where students read together. Independent reading where students read on their own. A word study of some sort. This could include a phonics lesson, but not all word study components are phonics lessons. And then some sort of writing. Encoding to go along with the decoding lessons. The components of a structured literacy program. Phonological awareness, sound symbol association, symbol instruction, orthography, morphology, syntax, vocabulary, reading comprehension, reading fluency. As you read through this, you'll notice that all of the big five is touched on. And when we're talking about structured literacy, we're not talking about getting rid of guided reading groups. We're talking about not using guided reading levels. In structured literacy, there are skill-based small groups that get instruction instead of guided reading levels. So you have assessment-driven instruction at a small group level where it's skill-based instead of level-based. So everybody's a critic, right? Let's talk about some of the things the critics have to say about our literacy programs. So balanced literacy. Critics of balanced literacy believe that it focuses students on grapheme representations combined with context or imagery to teach beginning literacy skills. However, the work of Louisa Moats shows us that students learn speech to print, not print to speech. If children cannot encode and decode naturally, then exposure to unfamiliar texts will only lead to practicing compensatory strategies such as relying on picture cues when valuable instructional time passes by. A weak foundation of decoding strategies compromises reading comprehension. We cannot comprehend what we cannot read. This touches a little bit on the 3 cueing system. The use of those strategies like relying on picture cues. Has anybody ever seen the Beanie Baby strategies for reading? I see some nods. Those rely heavily on the 3 cueing system. What does the picture tell you about what the sentence might say? These are strategies that assume the student already has those foundational reading skills. So when we're looking at students who don't necessarily have those foundational reading skills, we're teaching them to kind of rely on skills that aren't going to be able, that aren't sustainable. The critics of structured literacy believe that limiting students to phonemes initially and then decodable text stifles the development of fluency and prosody. So when we are only reading decodable texts, some people believe that that limits our ability to read fluently. This can be sidestepped in a lot of ways. There are decodable readers theaters. Decodable readers have really stepped up recently, and you can find some pretty good decodable readers. Voyager Sopris has some pretty great ones. You can find them all over the place. I know a lot of times when we think decodable readers, we think Bob books, and then we think, oh, I've got a 3rd grader. They can't read that. But decodables have really come a long way. So before we take a look at some research, are there any questions about the differences between balanced literacy and structured literacy? This is Airy's Phases of Reading Development. This is the work of Lene Airy, 98 and 2002. Lene Airy breaks down how people learn to read into stages. So one of the things that it's important to know about Airy's Phases of Reading Development is that they're phases, not stages. They are fluid, and a student can be in more than one at the same time. I apologize for the background noise. In our pre-alphabetic stage, these are our earliest readers. They get general concepts of print and can pick up on incidental visual cues. These are the students who see the golden arches and they say, that says McDonald's. Or they see the toothpaste logo that they use at home and they say, that says toothpaste. They're able to read logos. They have a general idea of what it means, but they can't actually read yet. In the early alphabetic phase, they begin to pick up on letter names and some letter sounds, and they're developing early phonological and phoneme awareness. These kiddos can probably rhyme. This is where reading begins. In the later alphabetic phase, they begin to develop an automatic sight word recognition. Anybody who did not hear my spiel in a previous session today, our sight word recognition is actually our ability to identify words based on our sight memory. We often think that our Dolch list or our Fry list, our high frequency list that comes with our basal program, that these are our sight words. But sight words actually refers to any word that is committed to your sight vocabulary. They can be regular words and they can be regular words. So everybody here would probably have the word cat as a sight word in their sight vocabulary, but they also might have some other ones that are irregular, like alphabetic. Initial set of phoneme grapheme correspondences. So we're starting to see that bridge into phonics. Basic phoneme awareness, 3 to 4 phonemes. And then our more advanced students fall into the consolidated alphabetic phase, where there are more sight words, there's orthographic mapping, that strong phonics bridge, and advanced phoneme awareness, where we're talking about deletion and substitution and reversal of phonemes. It's impossible for students to memorize more than a few dozen words without sight into the purpose of alphabetic symbols. Alphabetic learning is acquired through progressive differentiation of both the sound in the words and the letter sequences in print. In Aries' model, these are phases, not stages. One of the things that it's really important to notice about these phases is that even though students start learning to read through those incidental visual cues, it's the phonological skills that they need in order to continue. So a student can identify a picture or a logo and identify that with a word, but it isn't until they have that phonological awareness and phoneme awareness that they can start bridging the sounds that go with the letters with that orthographic mapping. Does anybody have any questions about Aries phases of reading development? It's pretty cool to look at this from a writing perspective too, how the incidental visual cues might look like a little scribble. The scope and sequence for phoneme awareness, it's really hard to put charts that are that big into the presentation. If we have time at the end, I would love to show you guys one of the charts that shows the advancement of phoneme awareness, because it starts at the age of about 3. And by the time you get into this consolidated alphabetic phase with the advanced phoneme awareness, the deletion and substitution and reversals of phonemes, you're talking 9 or 10 years old, which makes them a 2nd or 3rd grader. So we think a lot of times as phonological awareness and phonemic awareness as early literacy skills, but they're actually skills that are used way into 2nd and 3rd grade. And for example, when we talk about reversal of phonemes, it can become tricky if I said cat, now say cat backwards. You might have to think about that for a little bit. It's a more advanced phoneme skill than to count how many phonemes are in the word cat. There are assessments like the PAST that will start with your most basic phoneme skills and take it to your more advanced phonemic awareness skills with those reversals. And it's very interesting as a teacher to watch students do these tasks. It's even more interesting to watch other educators do these tasks. Honestly, if you're looking for a good time, you should download a copy of the PAST and ask one of your colleagues to take it so that you can practice. It's a hoot to watch some of those more advanced phonemic awareness skills. So this is the 4-part processor. This is the work of Marilyn Adams. Our 4-part processor is a pretty simple way to look at how reading happens. You have a phonological processor in the front of your brain that processes all of our speech sounds. And in the back of your brain, in your occipital lobe, you have an orthographic processor that processes written words. Those two processors are linked on what in your brain is called the angular gyrus. And this is where phonics happens. This is where your brain is able to map the speech sounds to the written symbols. Once you have those processors working together and you have a nice solid foundation, a good base, then your brain is able to take those words that you're reading and create meaning. And once you have meaning, you can create context. This is where your sentence structure would come in. This is a bottom-up model. we start at the bottom with a nice solid foundation, like when you build a house. You would never dare build a house starting with a roof. You want to create a nice solid foundation. You want to dig into the earth, and you build solid walls. You don't want to, put sticks into sand. You want a nice solid foundation, and the 4-part processor really shows that as a model. You have to have a strong phonological and orthographic base put together with phonics, that ability to map it, in order to build good readers, because we can't understand what we can't read. So we talked about our 3 cueing system, our MSV analysis on our running records. Did they make an error that was related to meaning, or was it semantic, or was it visual? Which cue are they missing, right? When teachers have conflicting information about the theory behind how we read, the 3 cueing system model compared to recent research can be conflicting. So the 3 cueing system is at odds with the research-based model in a number of ways. So when we talk about the 3 cueing system, we're talking about work from the 1980s, which has since been marked as not as valid as some other models. So one of the things that the 3 cueing system says is that decoding is seen as more of a visual skill than a linguistic skill. As such, phonology is minimized, and the importance of teaching letters and sounds independent of each other and in an interconnected way is lost. In the 3 cueing system, students are initially encouraged to use context to sort of guess at what words are when reading. It's a top-down approach that often fails, especially once the text becomes more complex in upper elementary. Like I said earlier, it's not really a sustainable strategy. Students are left with no direction on how to decode an unfamiliar word. The 3 cueing system kind of de-emphasizes the role of phonology and phonics, which doesn't agree with current research. As a result, teachers might want to look at what their program is based on and see how it relates to the 4-part processor. It's important to note that the 3 cueing system does not appreciate the importance of phonology as a foundational skill, and also that the act of word recognition occurs across multiple processing systems, that there's not one place for reading. We talked about the bottom of the 4-part processor and phonological awareness as part of that foundation, but you saw that also in Aries phases of reading development. If we go backwards some, even Lene Airy noted that when you are learning to read, it's not a visual memorization. In order to be a good reader and have that solid sight word recognition in your memory, you have to have a solid phonological base. Studies have shown that we learn to speak naturally. Think of a baby. As soon as a baby is born, it's able to coo. It starts making sounds because our ability to make sounds in a manner of speech is something that comes naturally because we have a tongue, we have teeth, we have lips, we have vocal cords, and reading is not the same way. And when you look at something like the 3 cueing system, it's not taking that into consideration. So we want to make sure that whatever system, whatever program, whatever strategies, practices we're using, we are making sure that we are taking into account that 4-part processor. And that doesn't mean that we should trash every program. That doesn't. It means that as good teachers, we have to adjust what we are doing to make our students most successful. I was speaking earlier with somebody who asked about guided reading, and the conversation that we had was that your groups are great if you've got them in skill-based groups. But when we start talking about throwing in those guided reading levels, what are we trying to teach them? If they've got a skill deficit in a specific phonics skill, and we've given them a guided reading book on a level X, what skill are we trying to teach them from that book that applies to the skill that their group is working on? Everything can be useful in its own way. Guided reading books are actually fantastic. I'm sorry, I have summer brain. They are, great trade books. I knew that it started with a T and then I couldn't remember the word. Sorry, summer brain. Guided reading books, especially in higher levels, can be great trade books. They can be an excellent source for social studies lessons, but they're not always going to be your best books for teaching good lessons where you're taking into account the 4-part processor. It doesn't mean that you can't use them. That was a lot. How are you guys feeling about that? What questions do we have? I can't see if anybody unmuted.
Des, I have a question.
Yes.
I am a reading specialist. So how do I help teachers in my district move from balanced literacy to structured literacy? Like, what is the best way to help that transition?
I would say baby steps.
Okay.
Because we never want our teachers to feel like what they're doing is wrong. We all worked really hard to get where we are.
Right.
We put a lot of time and energy and focus and money into our career choice. And I personally was incredibly disappointed when I finished my reading specialist certificate and took my first professional development course, which was Wilson training, and suddenly felt like I had wasted all of that time. I felt like everything that I knew was wrong, honestly. So I would never want to insist on change in a way that makes teachers feel like they're inadequate, because they're not. They're all hard workers and they all have their students' best interest at heart. So I would recommend starting with baby steps. Look at your assessment. What assessments are you using and what data are you getting from them? Are you using assessments that assess early literacy skills like DIBELS or Acadience, or are you only using an F&P or DRA?
Okay.
And what I would do is offer to help them with assessments that give good data that can help make the move. The IU, our department, has lots of Acadience trained mentors now. So if Acadience is something that you are interested in getting started, we can help you with that. And Acadience is good. Acadience and Dibbles are basically the same thing. There was a difference of opinion about something. So they split into two companies, but then didn't change anything. And all of Acadience's paperwork still says Dibbles. It's humorous. So they're basically the same thing. If you know Dibbles, you know Acadience.
Okay.
Renaissance and I always forget the fourth one. There's a fourth one, are all recommended through PDE. Patent recommended as good assessments, good indicators for early literacy.
Ames Web?
Ames Web, that's it, thank you.
You're welcome.
I always forget that one, I don't know why. It's silly. These are good assessments that will give you information for phonological awareness, and they will, you're not assessing the student's phonological awareness well into third grade unless you have to.
Right.
You are able now to go backwards to find out what level they're on. So if you have a third grader that's still struggling with those first grade skills, you can go backwards and find out what skills they're struggling with so that you can put them in a skill-based group. Once you're collecting good data so that you can create those groups, I think things kind of start to fall into place there, but baby steps, you know, get good assessments, get skill-based groups, start to take away their F&P. My F&P was like my baby blanket. Don't take away my F&P. I have to know what level my students are. I had no idea that my students were so phonologically deficit. I had a student a couple years ago. She was a fourth grader. She was a fourth grader, and she was essentially reading on an F&P second grade level. And she was a Title I student, and at the end of the year, she had made no growth. And my supervisor was ready to lose it. What do you mean we have a Title I student that made no growth? I was like, she made no growth. I can tell you exactly why. I went back and I looked at all of her errors, and she had a gap in her phonics. But my fourth grade group was so big, I couldn't break it smaller. And her teacher in a private school didn't have time in her day to see small groups, and this poor child just needed some multisyllabic instruction that I couldn't give her because of the group that she was in. So while we were looking at our guided level groups, she fit into this group, and as time went on, everybody grew and kind of left her behind, and I didn't have anything to do with her, and it caused some problems. And if I would have been looking at skills instead of levels, then she probably would have been in a totally different group and getting the support that she needed and made more growth that year. The following year, they talked about holding her back, having her repeat fourth grade because her scores were so low in reading and math. And in private schools, they don't have the same kind of special ed and remedial support that they do in public schools. And it was a tough situation. And as the reading specialist, I felt really bad because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I feel like with everything going on to begin with this year, that this is not a year that we want to add anything to a teacher's plate. But at the same time, I know that there are teachers who are moving towards the science of reading, and I want to be able to support them as they do that.
That is fantastic to hear. I love that. The science of reading at this point is the only degree I would go back and get. I heard that there's a doctoral program at St. Joseph University that is in the making and kind of excited about. It's so great to hear when teachers are interested in the science of reading and moving their teaching in that direction. I would definitely start with assessment. Okay. And one of the great things about Acadience is you can go online and print out all of their consumables. You don't have to buy the program. You don't have to buy the assessment. So if you don't have total buy-in from your teachers and you don't have total buy-in from your administrators, you can still use the assessment for free.
Awesome. Okay.
And if you need help with that, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions right now? Can you guys open your participants bar and give me a yes if you're doing a balanced literacy program now, or a no if you're doing a structured literacy program? Are you guys able to do that? Because I don't see anything. You can't do that? Oh, that makes me sad. That's one of my favorite functions.
I think the only thing we can do is raise our hand or give the thumbs up or do the clapping.
Let's do a thumbs up for balanced literacy and a clapping for structured literacy. Oh, and that pops up next to your picture. That's cool. They're most common. I've noticed in just talking with teachers that Fontes and Pinnell is really mostly what everybody uses as far as assessments, and then they use LLI for intervention or even their guided reading program. And I can't say that I really blame them because it's really easy, but like the phonics component of LLI isn't always applicable to what the book is. And if you think back earlier, I said that sometimes in balanced literacy, it's like, it's patch phonics. That's what they're talking about. It's a phonics lesson, it's phonics work, but it's not really applicable. And if we can't apply what we're learning, are we more likely to retain it or not?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the thing I was talking to you about earlier, I remember what it was. It's called the core. It's like, it's called the reading source book.
Yes.
And it has like all the different phonological assessments in it.
Yes.
So that's what I use, like to look and see where kids are struggling. So is that still a good thing to be using if we're moving towards? Okay.
The core reading source book is, the core is great. They offer all kinds of stuff online. The only downfall to it is that there's no variation in the assessment. So if you've already given the assessment to a student, you give it to them again. They've already had it in that order. That's the only real downfall to it. But honestly, in my experience, if I'm giving a student that exact same assessment a second time, they're at such a level that it's not going to matter.
Okay.
You know, the students who are going to remember everything that we just did in 6 months or, 10 weeks or whatever, aren't typically the ones that need it again aren't typically the ones that are going to remember it. And the ones that are going to remember it aren't the ones who are going to need it again. No single approach to reading is right or wrong. We are good teachers, and we can take bad programs and still teach well. Immersing students in rich literature is beneficial to fostering a habit of reading and exposing students to a variety of vocabulary, ideas, and uses of language. However, the strongest evidence currently available suggests that structured literacy prevents students from struggling unnecessarily when they are trying to develop a reading and writing habit and appreciate all that books have to offer. I can think of many students that I have taught who just hated to read because it was so difficult. And when we can reach those students through good teaching and structured literacy and good phonological awareness and phonics, they're going to appreciate those books a little better. I got my degree in education and went back right away for my master's in reading. And I can remember the moment that I decided that that was what I needed to do. My daughter, who was about 2 at the time, was sitting in the rocking chair of her room, holding a book on her back on the rocking chair, feet up in the air, and mimicking the book because we had read it so many times that she had memorized it. And I had this epiphany. It was almost like a God moment. And I knew that I had to help every student love books that much. And you don't love books that much when reading them is hard. So I knew that that's what I needed to go do. And I really believe, based on what I have learned through the science of reading and through letters, that the structured literacy way is the most effective way to teach students. And I really like that it is supported by the International Dyslexia Association, because when we teach our poorest readers the best we can, we're teaching our best readers the best we can too. So that is most of what I've got. I am really whipping through these presentations today, guys. I'm really sorry. So what questions? What other questions?
I'll ask one again.
Okay.
How do you know if the program that you're using is structured literacy or if it's balanced literacy?
So let's go back a few slides and look at these components. So when we have a balanced literacy program, we're looking most specifically at read alouds, guided reading, shared reading, independent reading. There's word study and writing. So I want you to think about I'm trying to remember what it's called. It was written by the sisters. They did the cafe, and then they did
Daily 5.
The Daily 5. So the Daily 5 is very much balanced literacy, and these are the things that we're seeing. So in your read aloud and in your shared reading, you're very specifically working on skills that may or may not pertain to what you're reading. It's a greater focus on reading comprehension than on language comprehension than on word recognition. When we are talking about structured literacy, we have more of a focus on phonics, orthographic mapping, and then you can see all of the big 5 is touched here. You have phonological awareness, you have phonics, you have vocabulary, you have comprehension, you have fluency. Are all part of structured literacy. They just all have their place. In the younger grades, you're going to have more of a focus on phonological awareness and phonics and less on comprehension and vocabulary. But as we have that shift from learning to read to reading to learn, that changes and it balances out in that they're getting what they need for where they are. So I'm going to, okay, in here. Can you guys still see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Is it still my presentation or is it a PDF now?
It's a PDF.
Okay. So this is in the notes of the presentation on that page. Some components of balanced literacy, and the green part, I liked this printout. The green words are your national reading panel topics, and then the blue words are your reading foundation. So you can see in your read alouds, the guided reading, reading workshop. But if you read through these, most of them, you have comprehension and vocabulary, comprehension and vocabulary, comprehension and vocabulary, fluency and comprehension. And it isn't until we get here to independent reading conference. So I'm assuming this is part of I guess it's part of independent reading. It's not until you get there that you have your phonemic awareness and phonics. And then again in your word study and word work. So there are all these places that students are reading, but they're not getting any phonics instruction or phonemic awareness, which poses the question, how do they know what they're reading? So if we go back and we look at this was also a really nice document to read through. And it's got a checklist. So if you're looking to persuade teachers,
can we see those documents? Like if we look, like I went back to open up your handouts and your slide deck. Is there a way for me to see those then?
Here, I will put them in the chat. This one, that's not gonna
Thank you.
work. Hold on a second. It wasn't the link.
Okay.
Link. Okay, so there is your balanced literacy.
Thank you.
And here is the structured literacy. Oh dear, I did those backwards. Your titles are backwards. I'm really sorry. When you open up the links, you'll see the difference.
That's fine.
So the components of the structured literacy are not laid out in the exact same manner as the last document, but it's much clearer in that we are saying the component is phonological awareness. So I was making a connection that okay, so when we're looking at the structured literacy, we have touched on all of the big five. And we can see how it kind of all ties together in almost a scope and sequence. And you can still do your groups and you can still read. You're just focusing on these components and skills while you do it. So it breaks down what each of the components are. And then if you were trying to get teachers on board, here's a fun checklist at the bottom. What are we doing? What can we do differently? And this is a school in Kansas and what their guidelines are. Did that answer your question?
Can you explain like how does it fit in like within the confines of the close reading model? Because that like focuses so much on comprehension. So
it does, and we're talking, so when we're doing close reading, we're working with older students. We're working 3rd grade and up, you know, we're doing our TDAs. So the shift has occurred, and while you still want to focus on phonics and decoding, you've moved more into morphology and syntax. So I never completely understood morphology until I was in a training and somebody said, we were talking about spelling bees, and they said, you know, why do they ask for the origin of the word in a spelling bee? And it's because through their morphology, when you know the origin of the word, you understand better how it might be spelled. So if a word is Greek and has the phoneme, it's likely to be a PH. So you'll still be working on those components just at a higher skill level because your students are older. Reading comprehension always has to be there. It's just going to look different. The difference between a text-dependent analysis and a text-dependent question, for example. You know, you wouldn't necessarily have a first grader analyze the text. You might have them answer a question. So the comprehension is always there. Comprehension is required in reading. It's just on what level and on what focus. You might ask one question about phonics, but you might ask more questions about how many syllables are in a word. How many words are in the sentence? These are good questions, guys. I like the questions. Even with my summer brain. Anything else today?
I do have one more question though.
One more question.
I just had my daughter bring me, I printed out the documents that you gave us. There was a document that you had that was like a checklist. Where was that in one of these?
It was the last page of the Kansas Department of Education document.
Okay, maybe for some reason all of that didn't print for me. I'll have to go back and look because
It's a total of 12 pages if that helps you.
yeah, I thought I had it all, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Maybe I did something wrong because I'm not seeing it. I see 12 pages and I see like the components of the balanced literacy, but it was something to check off for if you were using the structured literacy, right?
Yes, it says, I've got it up on the screen now. It says a structured literacy checklist.
Yeah, I don't see that. The last page that I had
Would be references.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look through it. I don't know what I did because I do not see that page that you have up right now.
That is the story of my life.
That's not in the pages that I printed, and I have 12 pages here, and it's not in the document that I'm looking. Like I was looking at the document. It's a 14-page document. It starts with the components of balanced literacy, but I don't see.
So just click the link that says drive.google in the chat box.
Okay, hold on. That says drive.google.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even see one that says drive. Hold on. I don't see it.
I had mixed up the titles with the links. So it's the link under components of balanced literacy.
Right, hold on. I don't want to take up everybody's time. I'm sorry. I'll find it then.
We're on the last slide.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Think about how this met your expectations.
Found it.
How will you share this or use this information and what key information resonated with you?
Okay.
And then you guys can head over to your session 4. I'll hang out here for a little while and see if I can help Stacy troubleshoot. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, Stacy, I'm dropping it again.
Okay, I actually was able to pull it up now.
Okay.
I think I'm good. Yeah, I think, I don't know, like something, when I did it the first time, I got a different document. I thought I did the right thing, but who knows what I was doing.
There were 2 documents. I messed up their titles. We'll just blame it on me.
Thank you so much for answering all my questions.
Anytime. Feel free to email me if you've got any more.
Okay. Yeah, I might be emailing you. It's like hard to wrap your brain, because I told you I'm a 3rd grade teacher. So it's like, you know, you kind of have to do it all. So it's hard to wrap your brain around it.
Julie, you're right there where it is. You're moving from that phonemic awareness into that reading to learn now. So it definitely, and this is not what we've been doing. We have not been learning this way. We have not taught our kids this way. So this is a big change for us.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing like that we can implement is the idea of making the skill-based groups, especially for kids who struggle, like really diving into figuring out what it is specifically that they're struggling with in regards to phonics and phonological awareness. But we do have that core book, and I've been using that.
And we use that as reading specialists also. That has been part of our assessment from as long as I've been a reading specialist.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Stacy and I work in the same district.
Yeah, different buildings, the same district. I was so happy because I saw there were like 4 of us total from Dover in this session. So that was awesome.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
So
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Let me know how I can help, okay?
Okay. See ya.
Be in touch.
See ya.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions, Megan?